Je vais dormir chez Rémi ce soir.
Tu reviens chez nous un jour?
Peut-être.
The real origin story of this film was reading an American research done by a New York psychologist called Niobe Way. And she followed 150 boys between the age of 13 and 18. And at the age of 13, she asked them to talk about their friendships, their male friendships. And what is beautiful to read is that at that age, these boys talk about each other like it's love stories. They dare to use this very emotional, vulnerable vocabulary, and they're not afraid to use those words. But then, at the age of 17, 18, when she re-asks those same boys those same questions, we can clearly read and feel that these boys don't dare to use that language anymore. That they have understood in the meantime that talking in that intimate, sensual way is considered feminine. And so a lot of them fear that. And I think I was one of them. I think I was one of those young human beings that feared my own fragility, that feared the intimate, and eventually that feared love. And so I think that what I thought of was always a very unique personal thing that I went through when I was young. I think many of us think that when we're young, we're going through the world all by ourselves and that no one feels like us. But when I read that research, I realized that maybe, I was far from alone. That actually we were many feeling that loneliness.
Est-ce que je peux poser une question? Est-ce que vous êtes ensemble? Non. Sûr? Sûr et certain.
Well, I think that when you come on that playground for the first time, you're confronted with the fact that our society is divided into groups. That we live actually in a very vertical world, where some groups are more popular, more desired, more important than others. And so I think when you're young, you have to be in confrontation with that. So many of us feel the force of a group, and therefore betray parts of ourselves in order to belong. So I think that I was someone who felt that from a very early age, and I wanted our films, both Girl and Close, to have that. To be films about that vertical society, and to be films about young people who so desperately want to belong to that group.
Qu'est-ce que t'arrive? Il s'est passé quelque chose. Dis-moi.
I think when we write, we try to find a universal expression for something that feels very important to us. But of course now, meeting the audiences and seeing all these different generations respond to it, I think I have become aware of just how many of us, or for how many of us, loss has been a vital part of our lives in whatever degree, that we have lost friends along the way, that we are reminded of the importance and the fragility of connection, and that actually that vulnerability and seeing that vulnerability on screen is something we all so much desire to see.
Tu vas chez Rémi ce soir?
Non.
It's true that we always, for now, have chosen one main character through which we try to show the world by their eyes looking at the world, by their perspective on the world, in the hope that by revealing that perspective, we tell actually something about society rather than we tell something about them. So I feel like we've tried to talk about big themes by choosing singular lives. Or at least that's how we approached it for now. It is important for me to show that other way of looking, and by showing that, making the invisible visible. And I hope I can continue doing that by choosing very, very particular, peculiar characters that are very dear to me. The beauty of art for me is when an artist starts from a very personal place, a personal feeling, and then along the way makes something universal, makes like a universal agony out of it. So actually when the artist leaves the personal behind, And so I think we really try to do that with this film. We try to start from themes that are important to us: friendship, masculinity, societal pressures, mourning, and try to find a way, try to find a visual and audio translation of a world that could speak to many. I strongly believe in this Greek idea of catharsis, collective catharsis, and I've always somehow hoped that our film could somehow relate to that idea. I think I'm confronted with the fact that friendship is central in all of our lives. We've all had friendships that along the way changed because of the things that we did or because of the things someone else did. And that heartbreak that can come with a friendship changing, I think we don't always talk about it because we talk about heartbreak much more related to the romantic relationship, but not as much related to, friendship. And so I have the feeling that a lot of people connect and relate to that. Well, I think it's a film about deconnection. I think it's a film about loss of connection, not only to the other, but also to ourselves. I think that from a very young age, we learn young men to value certain things more than others. We learn them to validate independence, competitivity, being more stoic with the internal world. And somehow I think from a young age we deconnect them, not only from others, from the world, but also somehow from what happens on the inside. I mean, of course I talk about young men now, but I could talk about human beings. I don't think this is only something a part of the male condition, but I do think that there is something in the masculine canon, in the vocabulary, that is very different from the feminine one. And I think we wanted to speak about that deconnection. I think we wanted to make a film that starts in all its fragile moments. It's a film that starts where you are amidst the flowers, but it's also a film in which brutality slowly corrupts the very fragile beginning of the film. And I think when we put on the news, we are confronted with the brutality of this society. We're confronted with men fighting out wars or abusing language. And so I think we wanted to speak about violence without necessarily creating violent images. But for me, it feels very important in this society that so often offers itself violently, to not avoid the topic of violence, and especially violence that can turn inwards. I didn't plant flowers myself, but I grew up on the Flemish countryside amidst nature, and flowers were a part of that decor. I think one of the first images that ever came for this film was the two boys running in between flowers. I think because it's a key memory from my own childhood. I did that with my brother, with my friends. But then when I started to dissect that image, we felt like there was so much in there. Because these two boys lost in that color book, it's a little bit this sort of iconic representation of innocence and childhood. And it's something that we will lose along the way in the film. And then, of course, the flower is also the symbol of fragility, of a life that is only quite short. And so we felt like that decor, using that decor to have the machines arrive, the sounds, and slowly cut these flowers from these fields and make the tonality change from color to these brown, made a sort of shift, a transformation in tonality that we were actually looking for in the dramaturgy of the film. And I think that therefore this decor gave us a lot of things, next to, of course, also the passing of time. Because how do you show the passing of time in a film? And these flower fields gave us that, because you can film them in autumn, and then slowly, when these flowers are planted again, spring arrives. I have to admit, I hadn't been to Brazil before. So this is actually my first time in Brazil, and this first time I'm also showing something that is incredibly dear to us. Seeing that audience, seeing the queue of people that was trying to get into the screening was incredibly beautiful to see. And then, you know, seeing everyone in that cinema, hearing those reactions afterwards, seeing those emotions after they saw the film was really beautiful. I think it's a film that moves different generations of people, because I think for a young audience, it's a film that talks about, you know, that fine line between friendship, relationships, masculinity, femininity. So I think that more fluid approach of all those things is something that really speaks to a young generation. And I think for a somewhat older generation, it's also a film on which you project a relationship that has been. And I feel like that is something that comes back in all these different places that we screen the film. I'm incredibly honored to be also part of the Mix Festival. I know they screen incredibly important films with topics that are considered for some taboo. And so I just feel really, really honored and thankful to be able to be here in Brazil at this beautiful moment in time.